Good evening, everyone, and everyone online. We have two members in the process of commuting in traffic and trains, so they'll join us shortly, I am sure. Thank you for meeting two this week. Hopefully we can move through this in a reasonable amount of time. We're here to talk about our strategic plan that has been worked on. I see Dr. Lemons is on the phone. Welcome, Dr. Lemons. Good to see you again. I know a lot of people have put a lot of work and time and energy on this, so it's exciting that we're to this point. So I know there'll be some conversation this evening around the mission statement. I think Dr. Lemons has some conversation around that. We'll go through the core values. And I think in reading through this, the best way to probably go through this is to look at the goals and look at the strategy around each goal at a high level and have the conversation around that. So I think we'll kick it off and go that way. So Dr. Adler.
Good. Yep. Good evening, everybody. And I have to say I'm excited again because it feels as if we're moving things along, and that's always a good feeling and accomplishment. And moving the mission and this strategic plan along is really a strategic move, and it's exciting to see it come to fruition. Again, thank you for Dr. Lemons for your assistance thus far and since we had our last board meeting. Just to be clear a little bit, I just named some things just for naming them. I'm looking to see if by the end of the evening, we would be in a position that we bring it to the next board meeting, essentially to approve. What would happen once we approve the document, you're essentially saying to the administration, right now, can you really go and sort of pretty it up a little bit into a good presentation and like a strategic plan would look like, right? So that would be probably in some sort of glossy literature and so on and so forth, right? So that's what we would do. I wouldn't bring that back. That would come back as this is it finished. But so I've been looking, hopefully, if we can get that far to at the next meeting, have our final approval of essence of the document. Thank you again to the nearly 30 people who participated. Just as a reminder, Katie, Jill, and Sarah were all participants, and Tara was sort of ex officio as the board chair. So that if we do have changes, I think there's enough people here to discuss whether that's keeping the essence of the document, right, and the spirit of the conversation. So it's kind of with that I'll let Dr. Lemons explain what we have done since the last meeting, but just as a big overview of it, we really tried to capture the board's sentiments and in some cases real specific comments and respond in kind. So we've done that, and I'll let Richard sort of frame it, but I'm excited about, because I really do see this drive in the district. I sort of see the connections that I think you would want me to make, and in essence, what we have here is going to allow us to do that. So I'm excited about that opportunity and to get it round up and implement it. So with that, I'll turn it over to Richard for some introductory remarks and get it up and running.
Good evening, everyone. It is an honor to be back with you this evening. This has been a long and very intentional and deliberate process, beginning back, I think it was almost a year and a half ago, when the board interviewed me remotely when I was presenting in New Orleans and was on a call with several board members, and we were starting to think about what this might look like in the next steps. And we embarked on a pretty well crafted and designed process that the board helped to craft. Obviously, it was interrupted for a moment with COVID, but then we re-engaged and got back into it. I want to echo the sentiments of the superintendent in celebrating the work of the steering committee. As he said, almost 30 individuals spent countless hours working together, trying to conduct a needs assessment of the district, looking at available data, evidence, collecting additional evidence, and trying to figure out where to take the district based upon where it is in the context of what's happening in your local community, what's happening in the state, and what's happening across the nation. And I want to celebrate their constant hard effort. Like they rolled up their sleeves every time they were in the room, and they stayed with it over time, and deeply engaged with each other. They had hard, challenging conversations and always left the room thinking about putting the needs of students first. And it helped cut through the noise. And I think we got to a great place as a result of this. We brought to you a draft back in December, towards the end of the calendar year, and you provided detailed feedback on various sections of the draft. There was quite a bit of attention, as is noted, on the mission. There was attention on the core values and in the order, and with a little bit of editing there. And then there were various questions raised throughout the goal areas. And what happened since that date in December is the superintendent and assistant superintendent and I, we reviewed our handwritten notes, and I went back and watched the video again. And then we walked back through section by section every single time that there was feedback in the plan. And we tried to figure out how to sort through that per your charge, because we left the end of that December meeting with you reaching agreement that the best way to move forward is that the three of us would try to incorporate your edits, bring back to a committee of the whole a new version that you could then take from there and edit. Additionally, if you saw fit, and engage in a conversation about where to go next. So what we sent to you is a version that includes all of those edits. I think that the version you got has the simple markup, so you don't see every line through, but we have all of the information about what was shifted and what was changed. I want to talk to you a bit about some of the key definitions. We've talked about these in the past, but they come up regularly in the course of the conversation. So I want to make sure we're on the same page around mission, vision, core values. And then I think it makes sense to jump into mission and look at the edits and on a few different versions, because that gathered the majority of the attention when we were together 2 months ago. And then, as was suggested, we'll go through the sections and try to see if you have any questions, if there are any additional edits, and if there are areas where the board feels as if there's a discussion that needs to be had in order to reconcile different perspectives or to make some shifts in what's written in the draft. With all of that said, as a preamble, I'm going to bring, if the host would give me sharing capacity in Zoom, I'm going to bring up a PowerPoint. And then I'll also be sharing the draft document in the course of the evening so that, oh, thank you. It's being shared from there. Perfect. So if you would advance to the next slide. Thank you very much. So what you see in front of you are definitions for three of the most commonly incorporated components of a strategic plan, whether they're in education or whether they're in the for-profit sector, the nonprofit sector, or the government sector. And the reasons that these are incorporated so often is that collectively they help to tell a story about that organization. The vision statement is, where are you trying to get to? It's that, as this definition says, it's what the organization is aspiring to embody or to bring about. It should be visionary, as is suggested. It should be looking into the future, and it should be referencing the kinds of things that you hope will happen in the world. Sometimes vision statements are very tight around very discrete kind of outcomes, but more often than not, vision statements, especially in the government sector, in the nonprofit sector, tend to describe a vision that may be even bigger than one organization can bring about, but it creates a drive and a pull. It creates a North Star to go toward. The mission statement is a statement of why the organization exists. What is the fundamental purpose of the organization? What does it do on a daily basis in service of that vision? And core values represent the beliefs and the collective commitments that adults make to shape the culture and the path for achieving the vision and the mission. I think that the superintendent has regularly said that he likes to think of these as these collective commitments that can bind together the people in the organization, not just on the what of the work, but the how are we going to approach it, and that creates parameters, creates clarity, begins to shape the culture of the organization. And I just wanted to start with those because we're going to be diving into those sections, especially diving into the, I believe the first one we're dropping into is the mission statement that garnered the most attention. So on the next slide, what we have for you are 3 different columns representing 3 different versions. In the far left column is the column that we presented to you in December, which inspired quite a bit of conversation. There was discussion around the order of ideas. There was discussion about what might have been left out in this version relative to past organizational statements. There was just and there was also discussion of sentence construction. What was modifying what in the sentence? So we also have in the second column and the third column our efforts to try to incorporate all of the feedback that was provided that evening. We tried our best to capture what was going on in that conversation, but you'll know we didn't get to a singular place, so we wanted to put a couple in front of you to generate some conversation. So what I will say in that dialogue, one of the things that emerged in your conversation, if you recall back in December, was you wanted a more overt reference to students. So that was, I think, the general idea. There were more specific forms of advocacy around that. There was discussion of a statement, schools exist for children, which had been in a previous statement from the organization. There were questions again about what is modified, which terms were modifying what other terms. And so we tried to make sure that students came into these 2 new options. And we also wanted to make sure that the language was cleaned up a little bit. So what I would like to do is pause and see if we can have a discussion about these options and what seems to resonate, as well as what suggestions you may have that could move us towards consensus on what is the optimal mission statement for Darien Public Schools.
Mrs. Ritchie.
I'll just say I didn't like option 1, and I've been struggling all day with option 2. Option 3 is a little bit better, but I still think I'm not sure it's flowing for me. So I'm happy people jump in. I really feel strongly that schools exist for children should be incorporated. I don't know how, but in some way.
Mrs. Stein.
I don't know if everyone checked their emails, and Richard, you probably don't have it, but I was talking to Tara today, and I've been struggling with it too, and feeling like it was a little bit disjointed and sort of key phrases, but not synthesized. So Tara and I did a little tinkering and wordsmithing and sent it to Duke. So what we were thinking was, I can read it too, I didn't bring my glasses.
I have it here.
Okay, so perhaps what we say is schools exist for children at the beginning, and say that the mission of Darien Public Schools is to inspire a love of learning in all students so they may develop into critical thinkers and innovative creators who contribute to the world, live with integrity, and have purpose beyond themselves. Now, the one thing we took out of that was problem solvers, because I kept going back and forth. What's the difference between problem solving, critical thinking? Are they somewhat overlapping? Do we need both? So that's sort of something Tara and I just sort of jiggered with this afternoon. And I put that out there.
Is it possible? So again, we're in a somewhat technical disadvantage because I'm not sharing my screen. I don't have the ability. You don't have the ability to see what I'm typing in real time. I think that would be optimal if it's possible to do that. If it's not, then we'll figure out another solution. But if you wouldn't mind providing for me I got the first half of that statement. I'd like to get it captured.
Okay. So
what I have is schools exist for children. The mission of Darien Public Schools is to create a love of learning.
To inspire a love
Okay.
of learning in all students so they may develop into critical thinkers and innovative creators who contribute to the world, comma, live with integrity, comma, and have purpose beyond themselves. We sort of made it more of a statement rather than sort of ideas.
So I'm just trying to make sure I've got this captured.
Go ahead, Mrs. Parent.
Thank you. So I think I spoke with Jill yesterday, and we both mentioned that, we were both sat on the planning committee, taking a few weeks off and looking at this with fresh eyes. It seemed, I don't want to speak for Jill, but for me, it seemed that this mission statement as presented in this packet didn't grab, and it was a little wordy, and it wasn't very powerful. So I actually came up with a bunch of iterations, but I do actually enjoy what Tara and Katie came up with. And I think it was important that the people on the committee, that the love of learning was there, as well as the contributing to society. And the living with integrity is new, but I think it definitely fits with what the 27 people mentioned in those meetings. So.
And I think adding all students versus students sort of captures the idea of all learners, because there was a lot of discussion about differentiation in learners.
Yeah,
So
I think that's very important.
I will tell you, I think the words that popped out, I like the love of learning. I mean, I think that resonates with me. And then I will say, and going through what Tara and Katie worked on, I do think live with integrity. And I really like have a purpose beyond themselves. I think that those are two pieces of it that I really think, kind of pull it together. Mrs. Buchanan.
I like the new statement. I think it's great. I don't think we need the schools exist for children. I think it had a point at a certain time, but I think this is very powerful the way it is. And I would be very happy to move forward with this. I agree with Sarah that I think it reflects what the committee discussed. And I think it's inspiring.
Richard, what do you think? Because you sat in and heard everyone.
So as the outsider, I think the question I'm asking myself is it consistent with the spirit and with the year-long conversations? And I think it is. I think it words here or there probably matter less to me than does it really get to the heart of the debate. And I see much of what the steering committee, at least my interpretation of this is I see much of what the steering committee wanted in the strategic plan as a whole, not just the statement. So that's compelling to me. I think there's quite, on a personal level, I think there's quite a bit here that's compelling. The schools exist for children. I don't think that something like that is not typically included in a mission statement. it seems like a bit of a core value, and I don't think there's any reason you couldn't include it. There's no hard and fast. It's not as if the strategic planning police are going to show up and be mad at you because you included a preamble sentence at the front of yours. So I think that if you're inspired by that as a collective, I think you've got something to work with.
So I'm looking at this and I just want to make, my response to this is that I actually like it's a wee bit more unique, right? And some of the words we have chosen before are perhaps a wee bit cliches to some degree, right? So it's a wee bit more personalized and unique. Potentially we could change a word or two here. So you've got in the critical thinkers and innovator creator. Where have we got it? Learning is I don't want to get into wordsmithing, but I am getting into wordsmithing. Well, maybe something like an innovative creators who contribute to the world with integrity and purpose beyond themselves, or if you sort of let us sort of play with like.
Yeah.
But in essence, I actually like the tenets of it because somebody just the same way as we explain what a mission is, what a vision is, and the core values, right? It's just important that we understand the terminology. So just you could say the superintendent, you should know that. I think I know it, but I just want to be sure, right? The difference that we see in contributing to the world and a purpose beyond themselves, because this is critical, because I have discussions with staff and I have to convince people to align things to this. And if we're not very explicit of what we mean, if we all have different name interpretations of what that means, that's not a good place to start. So just, could somebody just clarify in your own mind when you wrote this, like kind of what you see the difference being? I think I know, but I just want to be sure.
Mrs. Achman.
So, Alan, I think when Katie and I were talking, and I open this up to the board, sometimes contribute can seem very transactional. And I think if I remember the committee, they were looking, maybe it kind of looking at school as less of a transactional business and really a formative process. And so the idea of contributing beyond oneself did exactly that. And while I understand that might make it more difficult for your teachers or for you and your staff as you go forward, I think, and Katie, feel free to speak, the idea was to make it less transactional and more holistic and formative. And I felt like that's what I heard from the steering committee. So I was trying to really get in that idea of kind of giving back and making sure we're educating people for a reason, but not have it be transaction, as maybe contribute felt too transactional. But I'm open to that because I love the idea, but a purpose bigger than oneself, I think, allows kids to really form into the humans they're going to become and how they think that they can go out into this world. But this was Katie and I spitballing. So if Katie, if you have a different thought or anyone else has thoughts, I'm open to it.
Mrs. McCammon.
I would look for circularity. So I know we were debating what the words were, but when we're back in goal 3, we talked about service, citizenship, and post-secondary. I think in Portrait of a Graduate, there's some discussion of, sure. And so I think that this is a starting point, but I think probably some of the work of defining what that will mean is still to come. But if I look self-reference within the strat plan, I think I would use the same words, some of those words to define it.
Mr. Seen.
You guys spitball well.
Thank you.
I think it's spot on.
Yeah.
So without the ability to fully see the room, am I reading the room as we've got the mission we want? There's consensus around this fourth option that was developed today.
Yes.
Yeah.
Oh, fantastic. So congratulations on that. I think that is it's a big step forward. And I do think it's a rather compelling statement with a lot of energy in it. And I do find it very compelling that you're talking about schooling, not just for the sake of schooling, but so that students can do something even bigger. And I think that it has heart, and I do think that will ultimately line up with your portrait of the graduate.
Can I just make sure that Mr. Canberg's looking at me for some reason, and if he's not understanding it or has a problem too, I just want to make sure, like,
I just want to clarify the suggestion. I think there's just too many verbs in that back half. And so Dr. Adley suggested
Yes.
who contribute to the world with integrity and purpose beyond themselves, that people were agreeable to that slight modification.
We'll let the,
Okay.
we'll let the grammar and the English professional
All right.
do their work
All right.
behind the scenes.
Thank
Yes.
you. And the,
Yeah, don't let anyone rely on me for grammar. So way to go, Chris.
and the only other thing that would change is we typically wouldn't write it as the mission of, we would start with inspiring a love of learning. So it would start with the verb. So when someone asks, what's the mission? We would say the mission of the Darien Public Schools is to, but when a mission statement appears, it might appear starting with the verb first.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
I like that.
Perfect.
All right.
So thank you, and thanks for the clarification, Chris. We're trying to do it all across multiple screens.
happy days.
So vision statement, we did not, the conversation around vision did not evoke as much reaction the last time we were together. I think there was, my read of it, there was quite a bit of comfort in what was there, but just let's check in. Are people still in a good place around the vision statement?
Yep.
Okay,
We have a nod around the room.
fantastic. I appreciate you helping me read the room, because I've got a couple of faces on the screen, and then I'm seeing a little thumbnail of the actual presentation of the plan. Then in the core values section, there was the biggest part of the discussion was around order. You might recall there were little tweaks, but the main part of the conversation was, shouldn't there be an approach to this other than we just wrote one before the other one and then they just stayed in that order? And the superintendent made the argument that wellness is the one that in his mind should come first. And then and there was agreement that emerged that we would do wellness first and all the others would come in alphabetical order. One idea that was floated that I think is obsolete now was maybe schools exist for students could show up here as a value statement, but now that it is in the mission, I don't think you need to do that. So conversation, questions, suggestions relative to the core values.
I think we're good.
Oh, wow. This is great.
Well, if somebody doesn't think it's good, I don't know.
It's a minute warning. No.
So the next, so those are in many ways, those are kind of preamble documents. They're critical. They create the foundation, the pillars for the rest of the work that's in the strategic plan. And you're always trying to bring that into a kind of coherence. It's the next several sections that say, given all of those things that we've just articulated about the vision, the mission, the values, as well as our sense of what we need to get better at, that we find coming next. And what I was wondering if we could do before we start walking through each goal area is to ask the superintendent to talk about, in his mind, how he wants to use the next parts of the strategic plan, because I think it might give us insight as to what level of detail we want to talk about, and it just gives us a framework of thinking about what edits we want to suggest, if any. Does that make sense, Superintendent?
Yeah, but no one's going to do it. That's fine. That's fine. No problem. So the mission we described, the core values are for all the staff in terms of how we go about the work and the commitments we're making. And so I'm looking at really these goals: enhancing teaching and learning, and then the various strategies underneath. These would become your 5-year goals. Now, it would not preclude in any given year, like for instance, a COVID year, or I don't know, let's say you had to, I don't know, I was going to say close the school, but that's a bad example, I guess. But if there's a special thing that we had to do, it's not going to stop the board putting another goal in, right? These are real life and real life live actions and goals that can be revised, and they shouldn't be completely static. But this is going to, these goals are essentially what I would see would be, if you were to say you're going to have separate goals, essentially no. You could complement, but essentially this is going to guide the work for us. And I would be reporting back on what have we accomplished in year 1, year 2, so on and so forth, with annual discussion with the board in terms of, all right, are we still wanting to do that particular action? Are we still wanting to do that strategy? And so that would guide the work, my work, the work of the administration, the work of the staff. Oh, my apologies. My apologies. Won't go off. Our own
You're
silent.
in trouble.
Here.
I hope it's not Mrs. Adley wanting the milk.
Yeah.
Oh, it's the other phone. It's still Mrs. Adley, but anyway, so I apologize. Okay, we're good. So I'll be looking for, I'd be looking to this is the alignment that I'm looking at and to guide the work. This will translate into improvement plans at each school, which doesn't, in some ways that doesn't exist formally, right? But in order to do this, if it's not happening in the schools, it's not happening. So that's where we need to impact it. So that's the alignment that moving forward that we're going to be looking for. So again, these big areas, I think in my mind, okay, how are we going to enhance teaching and learning? These strategies are the things we're going to be going after. So those are the things that I would ask the board to those are the big ideas. How we measure it. We're listing things here. We won't preclude something being added or taken away, but you can see here just how we're going to go about that particular strategy. So these are things that I feel are going to help us achieve that mission statement. So that's kind of the big picture of. I can see the connections, and I'm excited about getting about the work. And as we go through this, we'll continue to have discussions about those connections and what does it look like and feel like. I'll leave it at there, Dr. Lemons. I think that's probably enough.
I deeply appreciate that. I think that's useful for us all. It grounds us a bit as we go into this. So we'll just tackle these area by area. Goal area 1 was enhancing teaching and learning. One of the suggestions that came when we were talking about this area was that where possible, we ought to make sure that we are defining the acronyms that become part of the alphabet soup of education, and that folks who aren't living in that work all the time find as a barrier to understanding. So we've tried to incorporate kind of fuller explanations along with acronyms. There was I was trying to think about the other edits that are here and what are captured here. Again, we try to define terms and clean up this section per the suggestions. And so I'll pause and listen for just places you want to discuss or suggestions.
So why don't we, from an organization standpoint, so we're on goal area 1, enhancing teaching and learning, which has develop a shared vision, revise and create curricula, and align job-embedded professional learning. So we'll open that up for quick questions and comments. Mrs. McCammon.
So one of the things that I actually like that COVID brought to this process was that we went through it and then we had a little time to do a lot of crazy learning. And then we have a time to revisit some of the work that was done over the summer. And so as I reflect with sort of, in some ways, new eyes, I looked particularly at this goal and I have 2 questions. The first, and they're related. The first is that I ran the elevator test myself on these. If I got in an elevator with someone and they said, what's your academic strategy? And I answered enhancing teaching and learning, it doesn't pass the elevator test for me. I want to be able to say, what are we doing in this school system right now? What's our vision? So related to that, I think is particularly 1B, because I think 1A is you're basically formalizing some of the processes, cleaning them up. But in 1B, I think that's where the real meat of we're enhancing teaching and learning to what end? And I see, creating diverse perspectives, differentiation, and I'd like to see us break differentiation out a little bit more. I think there's multiple components to differentiation. We talked just last week about looking at the IDEA program. We've talked about, part of why the argument was made that we would move a facilitator to an AP was to really facilitate SDI. And I'd like to see that more explicitly in the program. I think that's in the plan, that's a large body of work and represents something of a philosophical shift in how we do our instruction. And then I think then there's kind of just every day how you're in a classroom with kids who are within, let's say, the more typical parts of the bell curve. So later on in the plan, then we refer to STEM down in technology, and I'm fine with it. But my question back to myself was, if I got in the elevator and I said enhancing teaching and learning, how would I answer that? And would I be able to see all those components in this goal?
Thank you, Mrs. McCammon. Mrs. Parent.
Picking up a little bit on what Mrs. McCammon was saying, I'm questioning if maybe the differentiation could become a 1C, or adding it's separating it out a little bit, because I do see it as a little bit separate from revising curriculum to responsibly represent diverse perspectives. And you could also say that we're going to revise curriculum to meet individual learning needs. And I do kind of see them as two separate strategies. I don't know what anybody else thinks of that, but I think then you could be a little more specific about the differentiated instruction if it's in a different, its own category.
Okay. I think some of those points are well taken. I think some of those points, if we take notes throughout this evening, kind of work into the next phase of what Alan wants to do in terms of defining and putting more meat around each of these sections. So I think that's kind of how these comments should be taken. Make sense?
Chris, do you have any immediate reaction to that? I just want to make sure. So my immediate reaction would be another strategy that's specifically focused on instruction, not what's behind the instruction. So the differentiation, or if we call it something else, would be the instructional focus, and how that would be supported would be speaking specifically to, for example, potentially, since we have a program evaluation that we know is coming now that we didn't know when this was written, that could potentially be a strategic action, and then the implementation of those recommendations could be how we follow that through and play that out with a couple of other areas. Does that make sense?
So can I jump in for a second? I'm sorry, I don't know if anyone can see my hand, because I think it will help guide me as we do the rest of these. My understanding as we've done this is the strategy has kind of been broad, and as we move over in the categories, we've gotten more and more specific. So if you say in the broad category of, I'll just go to 1B because that's the one we're talking, of revising curricula, both of the examples, that's exactly what we're doing, right? And then where maybe the meat needs to come would be the action. What action are we taking in that? Some is diversified learning, some is diversity of what we're actually teaching. So I just need to know it. Like I look at our review of the IDEA program as a very specific task, right? I don't know that, to me, that would go in the strategy program column. So I just need to know if I'm looking at it correctly. Is strategy really the broadest category? And as we go down, we're narrowing. I worry that if we narrow too early under the strategy, we will be in the weeds by the time we get to the measures. But I could be looking at it wrong. So maybe Richard, you could help me as I go through it.
No, I think that was really the intent. The schema here is a small number of areas that we're working on. So enhancing teaching and learning really isn't even a strategy. It's just we're working on teaching and learning. And then under that umbrella, here are a small number of ways we're trying to attack and enhance teaching and learning. And then as you move rightward, there's what will that actually entail? And it's also the case, I think it was I think we were trying to build a flexible and dynamic plan that didn't have us articulate discrete 5-year things that what's going to happen 4 years from now based upon our current knowledge, because we might be a whole lot smarter on this very area in 6 months. And therefore the strategies, the particular actions that need to happen within a strategy might become more complex, or they might shift a little bit. And I think we were trying to create a broad framework that allowed for that focus, but also provided some flexibility. So I appreciate your want to try to keep that first column, not to let it get to actions. And if we needed to add another action somewhere in the second column, then that makes sense. If you add another strategy, there's a chance that it could become overwhelming.
Yeah, I mean, my thoughts on it are really like, it sounds as if at our retreat, we might take up student activities account. And that's a fine thing if we decide to do that. I don't expect to see that in this plan, right? Because it's a very kind of specific action. Dave's brought up technology, right? We might take on technology this very summer. And I guess my understanding, and just as we go through this, I want to make sure I'm right, is that the broad picture of technology will show up in this plan. The proposal Mr. Brown has is something as a board will attack kind of meaty year to year, and it should fit into this plan, but it isn't going to be enumerated in this plan. Is that right? Am I looking at it right?
So the question I would have is, and going back to Jill's comment, why do we enumerate in the first row some of these things, and then we get broad as we move out in the years? Because the first is very specific as what prescriptive steps we want to take.
I think that it's a great question. I think that the spirit of what's in the ones on the left was articulated by the steering committee as this is what they thought were the big rocks at a high level. They weren't seeing them as very narrow and discrete, and they weren't actually clarifying quite yet how that will actually happen. They just wanted to make sure, for example, in 1B, that we revise, and as we revise, we make sure that it's diverse and that it's somewhat personalized, but kind of keep it broad. And that says, let's make sure we develop a curricular revision system that works for Darien Public Schools, and the details would get worked out.
See, I'd be fine to see that, to make it personal and tailored to Darien Public Schools. Here's very specific prescriptive actions that may or may not be reflected.
Mrs. McCammon.
So when I do think that what I was mentioning could fall in different categories. So for example, I think that if I look under, if I talk about IDEA or the SDI implementation, some of those things would to me be part of measures potentially. I'm not talking about moving them up to strategies. But I do think those are pretty large bodies of work, and I'm not sure that they're completely captured the way the action is written. So I think my ask is that whether it gets another strategy or stays the way it is, but gets some build, and then that we take another look at the measures that we're using.
If I could give you two examples that are, I don't know if they're examples or not, but so we're enhancing teaching and learning. First of all, I would also be intending, I certainly won't do it without the board understanding and approval, but framing the budget development moving forward under these goals. So I would be looking at, and for you to ask me, like, what's happening with the enhancing teaching, right? We haven't seen anything that looks like that or feels like that or describes that or hasn't come before the board in terms of either presentations or otherwise. And what's the learning opportunities that exist for kids? Are they different? Right? Is there STEM? Is there different modalities of learning? Did we learn anything through COVID? Have we presented anything different? I would like you to think that you're beginning to see new variations of courses, curriculum, learning opportunities for kids. Now, the learning can also be opportunities to travel, right? Or, I mean, so my elevator speech is, does it look and feel different, right, for kids? And while supporting the instruction of the staff to implement those things. So I just, it doesn't say that there, but that's a wee bit of the way I'm looking at it. Some of these are structural things, But I'm also looking at this like enhancing teaching, okay, staff with this is our charge. How are we enhancing those experiences for yourselves and for the kids? I don't know if that helps or not, but
I almost see the strategy guiding us through whatever, year 1 through 5, and the action items. If you look at, some have 1 year, some have 2-year timelines, but I think to your point, Jill, and to how Tara mentioned it too, is stuff moves in and out of the action items as we look at goals and objectives each year. So like IDEA might come in and be part of it, and that might be a 1 month or a 1 year or 6 month thing. So I think things move in and out of it, is my view.
But, I'm sorry.
Mrs. Ritchie.
But those things don't need to be in this document.
No.
So those are all things that we're doing, and
Right.
this document is guiding all that work because it's a fluid document, it's a living document, so it's constantly going to be changed as.
I think like what we talk about when we go through the budget season, we have to agree on the work and understand what the work is, and that the administration can take on the work. So I think that's part of the conversation.
And I would say those conversations, whether it's technology or idea to me fits under that second thing, design units of study, differentiate instruction. So it does, to Jill's point of like a loop, what we are doing already is tying back to this.
Any other questions or comments?
So could I just play this back, and what I hear in the conversation, one part of it is you're saying this is a living document that will stay broad, that will be fluid and on a regular basis, kind of whether it's annual or as things emerge, there will be things that slide in because you recognize there's a new piece of work that has to happen in order to achieve the broader umbrella. That all makes sense to me, and I think it's in the spirit of what we were trying to do. I guess what I'm trying to get the clarity from is, are there any edits on the table now that the board is saying, yeah, let's put those in, or explicitly saying, no, let's not put them in because in general, there's enough there? I guess I'm trying to figure out what the charge is on this particular section of enhancing teaching and learning. Are there any edits that you want in the next version?
Mrs. McCammon.
Can I ask a question of Alan and Chris? If I think specifically about for the moment, I'll be very specific about IDEA and what we're talking about, or about SDI, that to me, those things could be broader than just written curriculum and instructional materials. So what I'm looking to understand is if that measure accurately captures what we're talking about. And I think they're broader. So I think there's two different directions you could go. Either let's make that a little bit broader and understand where we have to slot in. Because I think, again, SDI is a completely different approach to aspects of the classroom, right? But I'm not an educator, so please give me the right words.
No, I think there can be some clarity, and there are two ways to do it. One would be expanding the actions in 1B, and the other would be creating another initial strategy that focuses specifically on instruction, because there isn't one right now.
Okay.
So I'll play with that and hopefully knock it out of the park for the next.
Okay, thank you.
Dr. Adley? Oh, Shirley wants to.
Who's that?
Shirley.
Hi, Mrs. Klein.
Thank you. I just wanted to add to what Chris was saying.
Could you turn your speaker up, Mrs. Klein? Thank you.
Is that better?
Yes, thank you.
Just to what Chris was saying, I think what and I don't know where it does go and it's not an action, but what Mrs. McCammon was saying and Mrs. Parent, the notion of differentiation, it sounded like something clarifying, like designing instruction to address the student's individual learning needs really would capture whatever those needs are. So something that has that clarity of where that could possibly be considered.
Sounds good.
Mrs. Ackman.
I would just need clarification. Are we saying that we are doing that for all learners?
Yes. And that was my suggestion. That's why, yes.
I mean, I love your suggestion. I'm 100% behind it, but I want to make sure because, you know, we know there are federal mandates and what's the school board committing to? And I love if this board is willing to commit to that. But I think what Mrs. McCammon is proposing and what Shirley is saying and Mrs. Parent, and I love kind of the idea of it, could be different than the board all of a sudden seeing this next week and voting to approve it, because that's a pretty big, bold statement to be really proud of. But is everyone on board with it?
Mr. Brown.
So I would just have a suggestion to Rich's question. I would suggest the language in 1B, that first block of text in the second column. He had a comment about writing that in terms of being personalized and aligning with the values of the town or something like that. I would much prefer to see that language than as drafted.
So just to be,
I lost you
Hey,
there, Mr. Brown.
Mr. Brown, you kind of cut in and out there. Could you repeat that again?
Sure, I'll try. When Richard was speaking earlier, he gave some proposed language to, I guess, row 1, column 2 for 1B, the paragraph there. And I thought that sounded much more in fitting and much more aligned and with what we're trying to do. And I thought I would rather hear that language or see a proposal with that language as opposed to as it's currently drafted.
so to be fair, I'm not sure I was actually recommending a specific change to the language of that.
It was
but
good. I'm gonna have to rewind. I liked it.
but I am trying to get pinned down to, are we making, are we getting down the language that you want? Because again, it's hard for me to see the screen and see the faces. I just want to make sure that you're reaching some degree of consensus and we're pinning down any agreements that you're reaching right now in the room.
Yep, I have a slight edit
Yep.
to that because, thank you, Mrs. Klein. So with the action, the second action under 1B, modifying to design units of study and delivering instruction that attends to the needs of all learners. So it adds in the instructional piece. So it's not just about documents, but about the delivery of instruction.
Okay.
And we did talk about this a bit the last meeting, and that was when we added that attend to the needs of all learners. So that's been the evolution of this.
And then I think that measures column, if you would, it doesn't have to be now, but if you would just take a look at that, please, because I think.
So Duke, sorry, I don't know if you guys,
Go ahead, Mrs. Ackman.
I like that Dave has the raise hand button. I'm trying to figure it out. Way to go, Dave.
I don't see.
Chris, I actually think, or Mr. Turnberg, if you and Mrs. Klein could talk or rewind, I kind of took different things out of what Mrs. Klein was saying versus what you just said. And so maybe that's what I was saying. This is like a big topic. And maybe I'm taking it wrong. I'll rewind and watch, but maybe if you guys can put your heads together with a suggestion for us, because I think if that's where we are, Mrs. McCammon, Mrs. Parent, Mrs. Klein and I, there's some consensus and agreement around it, but it is a little different than what I heard you just say. So that's what I mean. This is a biggie, and I like it, and I'm willing to support it in the way that Shirley describes it, in the way that Jill would like to see it. But I think this isn't like a quick edit we're talking about. Oh, my hand was up. Sorry, Dave. I learned. I won't keep.
She's gonna come back to us.
I'm hearing the consensus of relatively separating it. I don't know, is that correct?
I think so.
Yes?
So we'll separate it and come back to us.
Thank you.
All right, good. Are we moving on to 1C?
Any comments on this one?
Any comments? We're good? All right.
Okay.
Move on to goal area 2, fostering a culture that promotes wellness, diversity, and inclusion. We've got create a caring school climate that promotes wellness. And we've got engage stakeholders in the practice of embracing diversity, equity, and inclusion. Comments, thoughts, questions? Good. All right. Goal 3. Yep, sorry, Mr. Maroney.
Sorry, yeah, I'm a little slow still. We mentioned, we've talked about open choice, and would that fit into this? Would that, because that to me is a big program, would that fit into this?
Yes.
This objective as an action, or is it part of the strategy?
I mean,
Or a measure.
I don't want to, sometimes some of these terms are interchangeable. I don't want to either way, it would be a tangible evidence of addressing, particularly in this case, well, actually, well, 2B in particular here. Yes, it would fit well within that. Yes, definitely. As a tangible example of experiences programming has changed to actually support that.
I mean, I think if you go through a year from now and look at 2B and what was the outcome, you've got open choice and you have the student teacher program, would be the outcomes.
Okay.
So again, should we look at those measures? Because we just have establishing a committee, and I think we're proposing more than that under this 2B.
Yeah, so I'm just trying to give you, because the answer is maybe. I'm trying to give a flavor of like the type of things that are going to happen, but I can't articulate them all. That is just going to drive the types of examples that we are going to do. I'm going to bring before the board.
I think some of the measures will come as this evolves and some of those programs come on board.
Agreed, but I think we have voted for the minority teacher recruitment. So I think we could talk about programmatic successes in some way.
Yes. Okay.
Very good.
Yes.
Any other thoughts? All right.
Well, Duke, sorry.
Yes,
The only thing I'd be careful on is until we true up our budget, we don't know what we have and what we don't have.
Yeah.
And that's why I think it's a really good living document. It's probably a great example to have in as a reader reads this, but we might want to wait until we true up our budget after all our approvals come in one way or the other. Just because last year we switched things. So if we have to change things and certain items come up, I think that we don't want something in a document until we have that. I hope we don't have to ever go there, but that might be the best part about making this a living document.
Thank you, Mrs. Ackerman.
So the only other thing I would say is that some of these processes, practices, programs either lag behind or are ahead of the schedule. So for instance, in that third column, you've got, to summarize it, that the committee will recommend practices and policies to put in place. Well, we didn't wait for that, right? So anyway.
Good. All right, moving along. Goal area 3, developing a balanced definition of student success through the portrait of a graduate. We've got ensure district values are operationalized across all schools, develop systems to measure, inform, enhance implementation of the portrait of the graduate, audit and adjust district curriculum, school programming, and student life to ensure focus on service, citizenship, and post-secondary opportunities. So goal area 3. Comments, questions? A lot of stuff in there.
The only thing I would say, and it's not like me maybe, but the only thing I would say is since this is going to be a part of the board publication, so to speak, it's another document that's, at least my understanding, the intent of this is that would be part of this publication, right? The portrait of the graduate. Then if it's going to be tagged along with the board's overarching guiding documents, I think you should approve those, the portrait of the graduate.
Really? How would we approve the portrait of the graduate? The committee hasn't met in months.
Well, this describes that this has to be completed by the end of the year. It will be completed by the end of the year. So before it becomes part of this document, it would have to be approved here if it's part of the document. I couldn't do the publication administratively without the portrait of the graduate. The way we currently have it designed, it is part of it. And if it is part of it, since it's a board publication, I think it's important that you approve what's in it.
So I agree. I just think that, and Mr. Maroney, I know you were on the committee before me, and so maybe you can give some updates there, but I haven't seen enough work product. And I actually, and that, I think I asked you and Duke what their meeting schedule was. So maybe we'll be really efficient in 6 months, but I guess then I would really ask for a schedule of meetings of Portrait of the Graduate and really get that work underway, because I think it's incredibly valuable work. And if they go hand in hand, I think the board seems fairly ready to go on a lot of this. But I haven't seen work product on that as a committee member of the Portrait of the Graduate.
So
Thank you. Go ahead.
So the survey, the tenants that they were talking about, the attributes have to go back to the faculty, and also has to go back to I think that working committee before it finally takes shape. So I think, I know those are the next steps that need to take place.
Mr. Brown, did you raise your hand?
I did. I just wanted to echo Ms. Ackman's comments. I'm a little confused about the timing here when we do have a lot of work to come on the project. And I haven't seen anything in a while. And, the big question for that program for me is, I know we have the surveys, but how do we measure the effectiveness of teachers and performance of what we actually deliver in the final product of that graduate? And I haven't seen that loop closed. And I'd really like to see that before I get behind this program.
Thank you.
So just if I may, I'm responding to the superintendent's thought about that being included. What I've seen happen in a number of districts is that the timing wasn't perfect for a variety of reasons. I've seen districts in this state and others where a strategic plan was already in place, and at some point after the plan was in place, the district said, we need a Portrait of the Graduate. Maybe they just learned about the idea of it, and they said, let's create one that's in the spirit of our strategic plan. And then the board adopted it, and it became absorbed into the strategic plan. I've seen other places where, because of perhaps it was lined up with an accreditation process for the high school, they got a Portrait of the Graduate done, and then all of a sudden the district embarked on a strategic planning process, and they went in that order. So I think there are ways to do this. I think what I would suggest is you're not adopting the actual Portrait of the Graduate in this. You're adopting the idea that there's going to be a Portrait of the Graduate, and when the Portrait of the Graduate is in fact drafted and brought to you, you will then take into consideration that final version and whether it's the version you want. That's the way I've seen other boards do it.
But Richard, just for clarification, if we adopt this plan, we're not locked into this is all we can do for the next 5 years.
Exactly.
Right. So if we don't do Portrait of the Graduate now, and it comes up in a year or 6 months or 4 years, that there's no reason we couldn't, because we adopt this now without it.
Yeah, so I agree with Dave and Dr. Lemons. I would be fine moving ahead, but I wouldn't approve this conditional on the Portrait of Graduate. I think the Portrait of Graduate is still to come.
Yep. Mrs. Ritchie. Okay, good. Thank you. Mr. Maroney.
Just as a point of clarification, so the last time that I have that the Vision of the Graduate Committee met was Friday, October 9th. And from what I recall at that meeting was Ellen and Francis were going to write up a report. I thought we had concluded and found what we wanted to do, and we just needed to to historicalize and measure it and write it down. That was my understanding.
Okay, good.
So I'm surprised we don't have something.
That gives us some context. Thank you, Mr. Maroney. All right. Good. Moving along. Goal 4, expanding the professional capacity of staff. Explore ways to improve the district's professional learning culture and practices. Ensure a professional learning system that promotes continuous growth and support. Attract and retain diverse educators. Evaluate and adapt the current onboarding system to identify additional supports for teachers, including informal mentors. So, thoughts, questions? Good. Okay, Dr. Adley, anything there?
Nope.
All right. Goal area 5, developing and enhancing systems to promote effective communication. Establish effective and open lines of communication among all stakeholders. align district's guiding documents and communications with its mission, vision, and core values to foster coherence.
So, so on this one, since our strategies were really communication in nature, we streamlined this to talk about communication.
Good.
And let's be realistic, it's probably a good one to do it just on its own.
Good.
And that was per the board
Dr.
conversation.
Lemons.
And that was per the board conversation. That was the nature of the debate, is let's really focus this one on communication, because that's what we're really talking about, even if the header was suggesting something broader.
Good. Mrs. McCammon.
This is just a comment. I like very much how the goal has been rewritten. I just would like to make sure that it is reflected that not only are we looking at communication channels, but also the efficacy of the content of our communication. And so if we could just make sure that that content is somehow embedded in either measures or action.
Thank you, Mrs. McCown. Goal area 6, improving school facilities for student safety and access to learning. Ensure that the configuration and condition of the district's physical facilities provide secure and supportive environments for teaching and learning. Thoughts, questions? I think after our last facilities meeting, we were moving along on that. Mr. Sini.
Just the last action in goal area 6 identified the long-term capital needs to support teaching and learning. Is there another element to that? Like I think of that storage facility or something that, you know, we eventually address. I just feel like it just constrains teaching and learning when we have athletic facilities and other extracurricular facilities. I don't know what word I'd add right now, but
Yeah, you think of what the band needs, you think of what theater needs, or different things like that. So maybe that can just be
Teaching, learning, and school activities or school-related activities.
Dr. Lemons, do you understand that?
So I don't know if this is the right word, but I think you're saying something like supportive environments for teaching, learning, and co-curricular activities or extracurricular activities.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, perfect.
Duke?
Yes, Mr. Brown.
I would just question the first row, I guess, or the first block of text. And the second block of text is action items, and we've kind of done those already. I don't know if we really need them anymore. In terms of Oxbridge, I guess that'll be ongoing, but we've done some of this architecture. So I think congratulations to us. We checked them off before we even started.
Well, that's the whole intent here, okay? Well, let's give yourself a reply back.
So just a thought.
Good. Thank you, Mr. Brown.
And on that note, this is beyond what I know of in terms of where you are in these various processes. This very point came up in December, and maybe even more progress has been made in the last 2 months, but that question was raised, and there was some sense in the discussion at that time that you wanted to leave them in, but maybe we've even worked past where we were in December.
You mean you don't watch all of our meetings, Richard, to keep up? I'm very, very disappointed.
I did watch the December one a second time, for that purpose.
Mrs. McCammon.
Maybe we could write that more broadly to, describe the
Yeah.
But it is an example of
Well,
that we've started the work. We know what the charge was, and we get up and run it. So it's kind of an example of what we're trying to do with all
I
of
think it
these.
almost keeps us online with, look, we have to move into that school. We have to accept the school. We have to move into it. We have to get it up and running. We have to go through the process. We haven't even gone to the town yet on the facility stuff. So I think it makes sense to keep it in there. Goal, yes, sorry, Mrs. Parent.
I just have a quick question about the STEM Innovation Center and program under measures. That, to me, that reads as we're going to create some sort of fancy center for STEM. If that's the case, great. Let's hear more about that. But it also, is there's some academic stuff that needs to tie into that? And where else I don't see that delineated anywhere else in the strat plan. So should STEM show up somewhere else besides facilities?
So well, it doesn't say the word STEM, right? It would be under teaching and learning too. So that would be another opportunity for that. And the STEM center does have some infrastructure associated with it. So that would have to come forward.
That just seems very specific. jumped out at me.
Yeah,
That's fine.
that's fine.
Thank you.
Good.
You're looking to build a specific building, Mrs. Karen?
I mean, I'm ready with that shovel for the portables on my deck, so we can move on to that project next.
There you go. Goal 7, improving technology to support teaching and learning. Ensure strategic utilization of technology to enrich, support, and inspire teaching and learning. Establish and manage a secure, reliable, and dynamic technology system for effective and efficient district operations.
So this also sort of went along with 5 when we focused on 5 in communication. Then we all felt that, at least I think we all felt that, let's separate it and just keep it separate, given it comes up in every context we can think of. We understand it crosses everything, but we felt it was useful just to keep it standalone.
Okay. Mrs. McCammon.
So under this one, I compared this to communications, and you start communications with collecting stakeholder feedback. And I think given the tremendous amount of the shift that we've had for parents, students, and teachers, that I'd love to see a comparable set of work outlined for technology. I understand that it would probably necessarily inform a plan, but I think calling it out explicitly is valuable.
Yep. And I think to the conversation earlier about how these things fall into play, and Mr. Brown wanting further discussion around technology when we get an update. Good. Good. Any other thoughts, questions?
Sorry, I have one more.
Mrs. McCammon.
I want to go back to Sarah's point and ask it to Dr. Lemons, Dr. Adley, and Mr. Tranberg. That question of innovation, it does appear later in the plan, but it doesn't really show up in teaching and learning. And I know you just said that it would be in there, but where is it under goal 1? Where would I see it?
Well, the first place you see it is in the mission, and that's one of the most critical places, because that drives all of those.
Yes.
So that's your main place to have it. So I don't know that it has to. It's a judgment call whether it has to show up in other places, but that's really, we're going to be looking for, where does that innovation show up in the district, and where are we actually promoting that with the children and providing those opportunities.
So I'm just going to push one more
Yeah,
time.
go ahead.
So
Yeah, go ahead.
if I'm thinking about, how we've set up what the work is, and I look at teaching and learning, and I see first off, the shared vision, which I get. Then I see secondly, revising curricula to responsibly represent points of view. And then I see, potentially a separate one for individual learning needs.
Yes.
And then I see aligning professional learning opportunities. I don't understand completely, and again, this is maybe a question about how to read the plan, but where is our academic strategy with regards to what we're thinking about, nuts and bolts, 2 + 2.
Well, part of that, it will be delineated in the learning principles and the teaching principles. They would be articulated in there.
Okay, where is that?
That is under
It's 1A.
1A.
The first one. The district principles of
Yep.
teaching and learning.
Yep.
Can you give 1 or 2 examples of that? I just want to understand what that is.
Well,
So maybe-
it could literally say in there that we're committed to innovative practices, right? So
Okay.
these are commitments and guaranteed experiences, guaranteed to the children that we're making. So the word innovative and that action could explicitly be in there.
Okay, thank you.
Good. Any other questions or thoughts? Thank you. A lot of good conversation, a lot of good hard work. Thank you, everyone, especially from the board that participated in it, and all our constituents and other folks that participated in it. It continues to move along, and it is very exciting. Michelle, I will turn it over to you for public comment.
Good evening. If you would like to speak during public comment, please click the participants icon on the bottom of your Zoom screen. When it is your turn to speak, the facilitator will identify you and announce that you are unmuted for public comment. You will have up to 3 minutes to comment.
Michelle, I'm going to pause you for just a second. Dr. Lemons, I apologize. I want to make sure you have, if you have anything else you'd like to add, but also thank you for your time and energy and for being with us this evening. But before we go to public comment, anything else you'd like to add?
I don't know if it's well, one, again, a great appreciation again is it has been an incredible honor to work with all the folks in Darien who've been contributing to this. That said, I think from my point of view, I just want to make sure that the charge of the board is clear. So I think that across Chris and myself, we've captured what I think are the suggestions, most of which are specific, a couple of times were of the nature of, we'll get that in there. But on the whole, the document kind of stands as is. What is it that you need of us to do in between now and the next time you see it to get you ready? And maybe the superintendent's clear in his head, but I just want to make sure that that I'm clear so that I can do my due diligence and get you ready for what you need in your next steps as the board.
Well, maybe for once, maybe I think I am clear in this charge for the next, I'd like to sort of continue to move this forward. I don't see the changes that people have asked that cannot be done in time for the next meeting, essentially. And I would hope with the board, as I said at the start, my hope is at the next meeting, we can actually move the mission and move the document forward, recognizing it's fluid, but it'd be great just to endorse this and approve it, and let's move it forward.
Okay.
Make sense with everyone?
It's clear. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Lemons.
Thank
Thank
you.
you. Thank you.
Okay, have a nice evening.
You too. Michelle.
There are no raised hands at this time, Mr. Deneen.
All right. Thank you all for joining us this
Thank
evening.
you, everybody.
Have a
Much
good evening.
appreciated. That's
Motion to adjourn.
This is
Mr.
exciting to me.
Sini, second, Mrs. Stein. Everyone have a good evening. Have a good weekend. Thank you all. Yes.